Alright, it's time for us to have a nice look at the EUROCOM Sky X9. Flipping this bad boy over, we're going to dive into the inside of it, and I know you've all been wanting to see some of that. We've got two screws at the very back corner, one in the center in the rear, one in the center of the chassis right in the middle. We've got two on the two edges closer to the front, two in the very front corner, and then one screw right in the middle. I've already removed these for the sake of expediency, so we're just going to grab this little grill area right in the front and pop that bottom cover off. Comes off very nicely. You can see that the ventilation for the exhaust grills is really nice metal mesh. Breathes really nice metal mesh in the bottom. Pretty sweet overall. So looking at the inside of this thing, let's poke around here. I'll show you what we've got. We've got the CPU heatsink and the CPU fan right in the back, subwoofer. We've got the GPU heatsink, two GPU fans here. This is a beast heatsink for the GTX 980. It reminds me of a hatchet. Lots of nice pipes on it. Two fans is pretty sweet as well. That's a bad boy GPU. We've got the battery right here in the front. We've got two of our memory modules on the bottom here. And what else? The two drives, 2.5-inch drives, are held in by one screw. In the front, you just slide those out very easy. They have a caddy on them, very easy to get out. So the keyboard is held on with one screw. It's marked KB on the motherboard. It's right there, right between the subwoofer and the memory modules. All you have to do is remove that one screw to get it loose. Right next to the CPU heatsink, there's a hole in the motherboard. You can use a screwdriver or another object to gently push up on the keyboard once that screw is removed, and it'll lift it up on the front side where you can grab it. It's very, very simple to get out. I'll demonstrate that to you here in a moment. So overall, it's a great machine. I really like it a lot. I'm sure you would love working on this thing. It's just really simple. Not much to it. One nice thing about this machine, although it has the GTX 980, it is set up as dual GPU. Here's the second slot right there. You could have GTX 980M SLI. It's marked there MXM2 slave. The BIOS is right here next to the GPU, right on the motherboard, easily accessible. So the metal frame that I spoke about in the forum, you've got an alloy or an aluminum frame that goes around the edge. There's a plastic frame right here on the front that is held together with screws. The motherboard bolts to it. The back part back here is all metal. It gives a lot of rigidity to the frame. It screws onto the palm rest from the bottom side. It's very nice, very sturdy. This plastic frame in front here is for rigidity as well. So let's open this up. I'm going to show you how to get the keyboard out. Now, I've had this apart I don't know how many times, so I made myself a couple little Scotch tape handles. I just pull those up. But as I showed you a moment ago, you push through that hole on the bottom. You can get your fingers on the back edge here and just lift the keyboard right up. Comes loose very easily. What's really nice is this sucker is held down with magnets. See how it sucks it down when I let go of it? It's pretty cool, really. Even though the screw's loose, the keyboard's not going to be flopping around. So you lift it out of there and slide the tabs out of the front of the palm rest area, or the touchpad, and then flop it over on top of the palm rest. So here we have our CMOS battery. We have our two additional memory modules. We have our Wi-Fi module and our two M.2 SSD ports. Here's the magnets that I spoke about a moment ago. I'm going to knock that ribbon cable off. Well, since I did, I'll show you how that goes together. There's a plastic retainer that's across here that just wedges in. You can push it away from the socket gently. It's fragile, so don't use a lot of force. Generally use my fingers, but so you can see for the video, I'm going to push on it with the screwdriver. You slide that away from the socket that the ribbon cable goes into. The other one has a similar thing. The one over here kind of flops up like a hinge to get that ribbon cable loose. But that's basically it. That's all there is to see here on the top side. Let me put this ribbon cable back in. So you just slide it in place very gently. It goes between the white retainer and the black socket, and then you slide the white retainer forward towards the black socket, and that clamps the cable in place. Here again, being gentle is the key word. Any of this stuff will break really easily if you're not careful. So that's seated nicely. We'll flop this keyboard back over, insert the tabs in the front edge of the palm rest where they're seated all the way, and magnets suck it down nice and tight. So that's it on the top side. So I know I told you guys I was going to repaste this thing with Cool Laboratories Liquid Ultra. So that's what we're about to do. So hang tight and let me get everything ready for that. Alright, let's get ready to repaste this bad boy. So we're going to put some new thermal paste on. Let me flip this around where you can get a better look at it. Get the CPU closer to the camera. So as you can see, I'm using a anti-static mat. I also have a wrist strap that I'm going to be putting on. If you don't have this, be sure that you keep yourself grounded to the chassis. ESD or electrostatic discharge is not a good thing to have going on. It can actually damage things. Luckily, I've never had that happen in more than 20 years of working on computers, but I'm showing you the right way to do it for this video. So there's 4 screws that hold the CPU heatsink. They're in a crisscross pattern that are numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. You want to be sure that you use a screwdriver that fits the screw nice, because if you use too large or too big, you're going to damage the heads of the screws, and you don't want that. So we're going to remove them in the crisscross pattern, and then later when we go back, we're going to tighten it in the crisscross pattern. It has a little guide, 1, 2, 3, 4. You just follow that. We'll zip these screws off. So this got a little handle. You just grab it, lift it straight up, nice and easy. Not much to that. This has IC diamond on it. Get you a close look at that heat sink. It's a pretty nice heat sink. It's made really well. Got 3 heat pipes. Nice thick copper base. It's got a couple of thermal pads that make contact with the other components on the motherboard that need to be cooled. So it looks it's a really well made CPU heat sink. We'll set that over to the side for now. Take a look at the CPU socket. This is the desktop 6700K. So it has the same retainer you'd find on the desktop. With the arm, you just lift it up. And that retainer just flops over. And you can lift your CPU right out of the socket. There's a little marking, a little triangle mark on this front corner that shows you where pin number 1 is. It corresponds with a mark on the motherboard as well. So if you take the CPU out, you want to make sure that those 2 marks are aligned with one another, because you'll cause severe problems, potentially damage, if you don't put it in the right way. And it just lifts right out of the socket. Not much to it. So the bottom side of the CPU, you have a lot of contacts. They don't have pins like they used to. You can't see that really well with this camera. It's kind of blurry, but here's a closer up look at the CPU. Sorry that it's a little bit blurry. There's the mark on the corner for pin 1 that I was just pointing to. So I know you can't see that very well, but at least, hey, I tried, right? So you don't want to touch any of these contacts on the bottom, potentially damage the CPU. You don't want body oil or anything on them. And you set that nice in the socket there. You'll be able to tell when it's in place. You get the 2 marks aligned. The retainer goes right over the head of that screw, and you just let the arm down. So if you're certain that it's in the socket the way it's supposed to be, flop it over and latch it down. That's all there is to it. Pretty easy. So we have some old paste we need to clean up. I'm going to use some 91% isopropyl alcohol. We're going to use some cotton swabs. I have some of these alcohol prep pads that are like for people that administer their own injections at home. These work really good for cleaning things up. They come with about 50 in a pack. You can get them at your local drugstore, Walgreens, Rite Aid, wherever you prefer to go, Walmart. Wherever you buy your stuff, like, aspirin and different things like that, you can pick these up. They're really inexpensive and they work really well. So we're going to also have a nice clean paper napkin available. We're going to use these things to clean up the old IC diamond. We pour a little bit of alcohol in this cap. We got a nice, there you go, just a little bit of alcohol. It doesn't take very much. We got a nice flat surface right here. We're going to set it on so it's easily accessible. And we're going to get some alcohol on this cotton swab and daub a little bit of it on the CPU to soften up that old paste. This paste isn't very old. Obviously this machine's brand new. If it was old, you might want to let the alcohol sit on there a little bit, soften it up more. We're going to put some on the paste on the heatsink as well. Let it soften that up. Help dissolve it, make it come off really easy. So we're just going to take our Q-tip or cotton swab and start wiping that paste. Try to get it piled up. You get like a big clot of it in the middle of this CPU die or IHS after we're done kind of wiping it towards the center. This is IC diamond. You don't want to just like scrub the heck out of it because it does have diamond particles, and if you're stupid, you're going to scratch up your CPU. But I've been using this stuff for years. It's great thermal paste. See how it's all kind of balled up there? And I've never had a heatsink or a CPU or a GPU ruined by IC diamond. They will get some minor little brush marks sometimes from it, but there's no pits or deep gouges unless you just go nuts scrubbing on it, which, here again, that's your fault. That happens. Just very gently wipe it. You notice I'm going in a pattern. I'm not just scrubbing all sorts of different directions. Just going in an even pattern. You get this clot of paste off the side of the IHS here. Wipe it over here on my napkin. Another clot over here we're going to get out of there. One right there. Notice I'm alternating. I'm keeping a clean side to the cotton swab on there at all times as it gathers up the paste. Just take your time. You're not in a rush. You don't have to hurry. There are markings on the CPU with the serial number and the CPU model identification and that type of thing. You want to take care with those markings, especially if the machine's under warranty, because it's important for the vendor that you purchased your machine from to be able to identify that CPU. I mean, it's really rare that an Intel CPU ever goes bad, but it can and does happen once in a while. And if you've polished the numbers and markings off of it to where they're not readable anymore, they're not going to be able to do much for you. So using a clean side of the paper napkin, we're going to get the rest of the paste residue off of there. nice and clean. We don't want any residue left because we're not going back with the same paste. It wouldn't matter that much if it had a little bit left on there, or a clot on the corner or something like that, but we're going to be putting a different paste on, so we don't want any of the old paste on there. It'll interfere with what we're going to put on there here in just a moment. So let's clean it one more time. You don't want any body oil. It doesn't matter what paste you're using. You don't want to touch it with your hands because the body oil will interfere with the paste sticking, and it won't be cooling like it should. So let's clean up the heatsink now. We're going to use basically the same process. I'm going to ball up all the extra paste into a big clod, wipe it off on the paper napkin. We got a nice clump of paste here. Let's get rid of that. Scrape it off on my napkin. There's marks. There's like 4 marks in the corners that you'll see on the heat sink that correspond with the edges of the IHS. You'll be able to see those perhaps in the video once I get done cleaning the paste off. You can kind of use that as a guide as to judge where the CPU is going to make contact with the heat sink. So just about got this cleaned up. Another pass or two with another cotton swab, and it should be just about ready to go. You can see in the video probably the reflective surface. Got a nice and shiny surface, which is good. The less porosity it has, the better contact it's going to make with the heat sink, and the more effective it's going to be. So we're going to wipe off all this extra sludge now with the paper napkin. Yeah, I can see a nice reflection in there, so it's a very nice surface. They did a good job with this heat sink. A little bit more alcohol directly on the paper napkin and get the last bit of that residue off of there. So there you go. You can just about see yourself like a mirror. Get a little bit more alcohol here. One more swipe on the CPU. I can read the markings really well, the model number and serial number and that kind of thing. So we're going to open up one of these packs of alcohol preps. Use one on the CPU. Just a final cleaning to make sure it doesn't have any body oil or dirt or anything left on it. You can actually see as much as I cleaned it, it's still coming off with a little bit of crud. Did the same thing here to the heat sink. Nice and clean, just the way we want it. These are really small. There's not any extra. So you can see it's not that much bigger than my fingertip. So I'm going to get a little bit of that paste crud off the edge of the IHS. See, there was a little bit left there, so we got rid of that. So it's ready for some new paste now. Literally squeaky clean. That's what you want. So we're going on with some cool laboratory liquid ultra. That's awesome stuff. You can also use some Pyobia liquid metal. It's also excellent paste. I've used both of them. They're basically the same thing. This brush that's in there does not come with the liquid metal paste. The liquid ultra looks like it's a bigger syringe. It's actually not. There's actually a little bit more in the liquid metal syringe. It has a needle on the tip, which makes it a little bit easier to apply. That has a blunt tip. That's an extra brush that I had from Liquid Ultra, so you'll either have to use your own brush or a cotton swab or something to apply it. I don't really like using a cotton swab because it can leave fuzz. The brush is nice, so you can get a little paintbrush or something and use it. So there's that. In this package, you're going to have some extras with Liquid Ultra you do not get with the liquid metal. You get this Scotch-Brite pad that's helpful for cleaning off the copper heat sink. You don't want to use it on your CPU. You get 2 brushes. You get an alcohol wipe. So you get all that extra stuff with a Liquid Ultra. So we're ready to go on with the Liquid Ultra. So this stuff has gallium in it. It's totally safe for copper and nickel. It will destroy aluminum. You want to make sure you don't get it on any aluminum surface. You also want to make sure that as it's conductive, you don't want to get it on anything that's electrical, on the motherboard, on contacts or anything. That can cause some serious problems. If you're careful, there's no reason to be scared of this stuff. It's totally safe as long as you're safe. If you're not, then you can potentially have a mess. Be careful when you squeeze this stuff out the first time. You can squirt out everywhere if you're not careful. I twist the plunger on the syringe and push in lightly just so that I can get some coming out without it squirting out. So see, we got a blob there. It's not quite the size of a pea. That's going to be just about enough. With the desktop CPU with an IHS, it may take a little bit more. Wipe off the excess on the tip, because if you put the cap back on without doing that, it's going to squish out all over there and make a mess. So we're going to take our brush and we're just going to start working out from the center. At first it doesn't want to move that well. It's like trying to brush mercury around. See, there's the 4 marks on the corners. We're going to brush it outwards towards the 4 marks that designate where the edge of the IHS is. Just keep brushing it out. Basically what we're doing is we're painting a thin layer of this liquid metal over the surface of the copper plate, at least big enough to come close to reaching the edge of the IHS. You may be able to see in the video, this is highly reflective. It's almost got like a mirror finish to it. It is liquid metal. So just go in a nice pattern. Any excess I kind of brush to pool up in the center so that if it does squish out a little bit, it's not squishing off the edge of the CPU. It's squishing out from the center toward the edge of the CPU. Stuff is really easy to apply. People that criticize it either didn't apply it correctly or they're repeating what other people have said. This is outstanding thermal paste. I've had it last over a year, and so have some other friends in the forum. Without any signs of degradation, cools almost as, if not as well, almost as well as the day it was applied a year later. It's easy to get off the CPU IHS if you decide to repaste or you need to. It's a little bit harder to get off the copper plate, and that's where you may need to use that Scotch-Brite pad. Don't be afraid to use it. It doesn't hurt anything. So we're going to apply a little bit more here on the CPU, right on the IHS. We didn't have enough left over. What we had a moment ago would have been enough for both the heatsink and for the die on a delidded CPU or on a mobile CPU that has no lid, or IHS as they call it, integrated heat spreader or heat sink. So set that aside. We want both halves to go together wet. We don't want one side to be dry and the other side to have paste on it. So we're going to spread this out across the IHS. It doesn't have to reach all the way to the edge of the IHS. You want to get close to it. The die doesn't reach the edge of the IHS all over. Theoretically, you'd only need to be large enough to cover the area where the die is underneath the CPU. I'm not sure of the orientation. It's a rectangular die. I don't know if it goes left to right or front to back. So we're just going to apply enough, a thin layer, to reach past where the die would be underneath the IHS. So within about 1/8 of an inch of the edge of the IHS should be plenty of coverage. As the two halves come together wet, it'll have a nice solid seal between the two wet halves, and you'll have basically like a soldered joint. That's why it works so well. You do have to have a good fit between the CPU and the heatsink. If the CPU is warped or if the IHS on your CPU is bent or anything like that, if there's a problem with contact, this thermal paste will not work well, and you'll need to use IC Diamond instead. IC Diamond's probably the best thermal paste in my opinion, next to Liquid Ultra or Liquid Metal. It does an excellent job, and it's very durable. It's just not quite as effective as the Liquid Metal, and probably for obvious reasons. Kind of hard to get better thermal conductivity than with metal. That's not a knock on IC Diamond. The GPU has IC Diamond on it, and I'm not going to repaste it because it's running plenty cool. But we're going to be overclocking the daylights out of the CPU, and we need it to be as cool as we can possibly get it. The only way we're going to get there is with the metal thermal paste. It makes a huge difference, and I'll show you in a day or two whenever Prima is done with the BIOS mods and we're ready to unleash on the overclocking on this. I'll show you some difference between the temperatures I've already recorded with what we have now. So I'm going to clean up this brush. There's no reason to throw it away. Now, word of caution. If you have people that you need to live with that can keep them happy, you probably want to buy your own bottle of alcohol. I'm putting this looks nasty. It's got IC Diamond and it's got a little Liquid Ultra. If you have a wife or a mom or a significant other, girlfriend, whatever, and they find that this cap off of their alcohol bottle is full of crap and looks terrible, probably not going to be happy times. Look and see, it's all nasty looking in there. Plus, you probably wouldn't want to use that to disinfect a cut or anything like that. So just buy your own bottle of alcohol. It's cheap. Keep peace at home. So brush is all clean, ready to serve another day. Lots of nasty crud on our napkin here that we cleaned up with, so we're going to throw that in the trash. And we're ready to put this back together. There's that hole that I showed you to push the keyboard up from the bottom. It's just right there. There's a little notch cut out on the edge of the heat sink so that you can easily access that hole to push the keyboard up. So very carefully lower this down into place, get the screws lined up with the threads. We're going to go in a crisscross pattern, so I'm going to hold pressure down in the middle while I get the screws started. These screws have springs underneath them, as you'll see if you get ready to repaste your own. So get them all started. Don't tighten them all the way down yet, just get them all started good. Make sure you're not cross-threading or anything that's going to cause problems for you. So you don't want to cinch them all down tight one at a time. You want to go in the crisscross pattern. Get them tightened down equally. You don't want to have the CPU cocked or crooked on top of the CPU, or the heatsink crooked on the CPU or anything like that. They need to mate together nice and flush. That's one of the reasons for the crisscross pattern. So I tighten the screw down, then back it off, and then tighten it back down again. You don't have to wrench down really tight on them. Matter of fact, you shouldn't. It's not going to help. It's not going to make any more pressure because the springs are loaded. The tension comes from the springs, not from the screws. You're going to want to take those screws loose someday, so trust me, don't cinch them down real tight. You'll regret it later. So we're ready to put this back together. That was quick and easy. I hope you found it informative and enjoyable. Be sure to click the thumbs up button and like the video if you liked it. If you don't, then just shut up and go away, alright? Anyhow, there we go.